Akihabara, a district nestled in the heart of Tokyo, was a place that seemed to leap from the pages of a science fiction novel. Futuristic skyscrapers, awash in neon light, formed an otherworldly landscape, while bustling streets throbbed with a never-ending flow of people. Cutting-edge technology, along with captivating anime and manga culture, intertwined to create a unique atmosphere, a perpetual celebration for all fans of electronics and entertainment. In early June of 2008, life in Akihabara flowed on as usual. Tourists, breathless with excitement, snapped photographs, capturing vivid moments, while vendors beckoned customers, extolling their wares, and carefree schoolchildren, laughing and chattering, hurried home after class. No one suspected that this day, the 8th of June, would become a day of terror, a day that would forever alter the face of Akihabara and leave a deep scar in the hearts of the Japanese people. The morning of the 8th of June dawned exceptionally sunny. The sky was crystal clear, and the sun's rays warmly caressed the earth. People rushed about their business, filling the narrow streets and alleys. Suddenly, the surrounding quiet was shattered by a piercing scream, a harbinger of disaster. On one of the busiest streets, a truck, driven by a young man named Tomohiro Kato, plowed into the heart of the crowd. It traveled approximately 100 meters, leaving a bloody trail of injured pedestrians. After the vehicle came to a halt, Kato leaped from the cabin, clutching a hunting knife, and began to randomly stab the stunned passers-by. The police arrived at the scene almost instantly, but alas, it was already too late. 7 people fell victim to this horrific attack, and another 10 were injured, suffering various degrees of severity. Blood flooded the sidewalks, staining them an ominous crimson as cries for help mingled with the piercing sirens of the ambulances. Akihabara, always teeming with life, was plunged into chaos and fear in a single moment. Following Kato's arrest, investigators began the painstaking work of trying to understand what had driven the young man to commit such a monstrous act. Numerous diaries, internet blog entries, and other materials were discovered in his apartment, revealing his inner world filled with disappointment and hatred. Reading these entries, one could see how deeply loneliness and a sense of rejection could penetrate a person's soul, pushing them towards terrible deeds. Tomohiro Kato was born in the Aomori Prefecture in the north of Japan. He grew up in a very ordinary family, attended school, and appeared no different from other teenagers. But as would later become clear, a deep psychological turmoil lay hidden beneath that calm facade. Kato had always been withdrawn, as if trapped within an invisible cage. He found it difficult to connect with his peers, and within his heart, he felt alone and misunderstood. He studied diligently, but his social life remained extremely limited, like a peculiar flower locked inside a greenhouse. The lack of true friends and romantic relationships tormented his soul, becoming a source of constant stress and profound discontent. In his upper grades, Kato found a spectral solace in online games and forums, where he discovered a semblance of virtual interaction. However, even in this illusory world, he could not fully escape the feeling of alienation. His forum posts, like cries of the soul, were full of bitterness, anger, and disappointment. He poured out his grievances about his inability to find true friends, the cruel mockery he endured at school, and the oppressive feeling that his life was devoid of meaning. After graduating, Kato moved to Tokyo, hoping to start anew. and found work at a gas station. This job seemed endlessly boring and unpromising, like a dreary song that played day after day. He felt imprisoned by the routine, locked in monotonous everyday life, and saw not the slightest spark of hope, no prospects for the future. His inner world continued to plunge into chaos, filling with a corrosive self-hatred and a loathing for everything. Several days before the tragedy was to unfold, Kato began to pour out his dark intentions online. He wrote about his plan to commit mass murder, detailing his plans, choosing a location as if playing a deadly game, and selecting the weapons that would become instruments of his revenge. His messages were permeated with despair and rage, betraying a burning desire to take revenge on a society that, as he believed, had turned away from him, leaving him alone. These words, a cry for help, were visible to everyone who could read them, but no one responded, as if they had not heard these death cries, had not seen the warning sign. No one took those chilling predictions seriously. Perhaps if someone had reached out a hand, if even one person had seen and understood what was happening in Kato's soul, this tragedy could have been avoided. But history, alas, knows no subjunctive mood. On the 8th of June, Kato rented a truck, and on that fateful day, set off for Akihabara to bring his nightmarish plans to life. His actions were meticulously planned. He parked his truck on a busy street, leaped out of the cabin, clutching a knife, and launched a bloody attack. His targets were the people who, in his eyes, reveled in happiness and prosperity, overshadowing his own life. He longed to make them suffer, to unleash all the pain that had accumulated within him. The first reports of the attack appeared in the news just a few minutes after the tragedy began. Photographs from the scene rapidly circled the globe, searing themselves into people's consciousness. The photographs showed the injured, faces contorted in panic, the focused expressions of the police and doctors rushing to aid the wounded. This tragedy was a profound shock to Japanese society, which was accustomed to an exceedingly low crime rate and a strong sense of security. A seasoned team of investigators headed the case. They questioned numerous witnesses, meticulously examined every piece of evidence, and analyzed data to understand the perpetrator's motives, whose name was Tatsuya Kato, and to reconstruct the events. As the investigation progressed, new details of his life surfaced, gradually revealing the depths of his psychological problems that tormented him. Witness testimonies proved crucial in the investigation of the tragic events. Many people who were in Akihabara that day shared memories of the chaos, the piercing screams and groans of the injured. They described the chilling horror that gripped them as they witnessed the bloody scenes of violence. One witness, a young man working in an electronics store, recounted how it all began. He saw Tatsuya Kato leap out of a truck, seemingly deranged, and immediately attack the crowd. The young man was struck by shock, but he didn't lose his composure and immediately dialed the police. He had witnessed with his own eyes how Kato, with ice-cold calm, delivered the blows with a knife, not showing a single trace of remorse. Another witness, an elderly woman who was at that moment in a cozy cafe, shared her terrifying memories. She heard wild screams and saw people in a panic scattering in different directions. Concerned, she rushed out onto the street and froze in horror, seeing bloodied bodies scattered across the pavement. Fear paralyzed her. Investigators also found entries in Kato's blog where, as if possessed, he meticulously described his plans, laying them out in minute detail. These entries provided undeniable evidence that the attack had been carefully planned, step by step. Kato hadn't simply lost his mind overnight. His monstrous actions were the result of long years spent in the grip of depression, loneliness, and all-consuming hatred. Psychological evaluations revealed that Kato suffered from serious mental disorders, yet the court deemed him sane. This meant he fully understood his actions and was entirely responsible for them. The trial of Kato began in the year 2010. It unfolded under the watchful eyes of hundreds, eagerly absorbing every gesture, every word. The public demanded answers. People yearned to understand what led him to such a horrific crime, to discover the motives behind the appalling events. Throughout the entire trial, Kato showed not the slightest remorse. He only reiterated that he was tired of life and desperately wanted death. He never apologized to the victims' families, and his behavior in the courtroom was conspicuously indifferent and cynical, as if everything that had happened didn't concern him at all. The victims' relatives were overwhelmed with grief. Having lost their closest loved ones, they felt their lives had been irrevocably altered, divided into a before and an after. Within their hearts resided only a thirst for justice and the inevitable punishment of Kato. Many attended every court hearing as if trying to express their grief and anger. The father of one of the victims, a young woman, barely holding back tears, recounted his daughter's dreams, her desire to find happiness and build a bright future. He spoke of her plans, hopes, and aspirations, all cruelly trampled by a single individual. The mother of another victim, a young man, painfully described her unbearable sorrow and how desperately she was trying to cope with her loss. She spoke of how unbearably difficult it was to live, knowing that her son would never return. During the court proceedings, the role of society in this terrible tragedy was also brought up. Many people were tormented by the question of why no one saw the signs of the impending catastrophe, why no one tried to reach out to Kato. Society was in shock. Hundreds of Japanese people repeated to themselves, "What has happened to us?" For the first time in many years, Japan spoke openly about difficult issues: mental health problems, unbearable loneliness, and insurmountable social barriers. The court sentenced Tomohiro Kato to death. The verdict was delivered in 2011, and the sentence was carried out in 2022, 14 years after the tragedy. The death sentence sparked a storm of conflicting emotions within society. Some considered it just retribution, while others questioned the ethics of the death penalty. The tragedy in Akihabara not only took the lives of innocent people, but also inflicted a deep, bleeding wound on Japanese society. It forced many to consider problems that had been silenced and ignored for years. After the tragedy in Akihabara, the Japanese government responded immediately, taking a number of steps to enhance security in places with large crowds. Additional control measures were introduced, increased police patrols appeared on the streets, and the rules for selling cold weapons, especially knives, became much stricter. But, alas, even these severe measures could not completely prevent the repetition of similar horrific events. The tragedy in Akihabara served as a powerful catalyst for a reconsideration and alteration of the law in the field of mental health. Steps were taken to ease access to psychological aid, and funding for suicide prevention and depression programs was increased. However, It took time for these measures to begin yielding tangible results. This tragedy also revealed the crucial importance of social integration and the necessity of overcoming social alienation. In Japanese society, traditionally dominated by conformity and collectivism, individuals experiencing difficulties in communication and adaptation often find themselves alone with their problems. Social networks and internet forums became a refuge for many, a place where they could share their experiences and find understanding. But unfortunately, these platforms also became breeding grounds for hatred and aggression. It is important to learn to distinguish a real threat from mere discontent in order to take timely action and prevent tragedies capable of forever changing destinies. The tragic events in Akihabara left an indelible mark on Japanese culture, penetrating literature, cinema, and art. Many Japanese artists and writers turned to this theme, creating works full of sorrow and attempts to comprehend what had happened, to understand the causes and consequences. A film called Akihabara Deep artistically reflected those terrible events. The movie told the story of a group of young people who tried to create an online community, intending to bring together lonely individuals. Additionally, the investigation of the Akihabara tragedy was the subject of the book, Akihabara Massacre. Based on real events, it revealed the fates of the victims and the perpetrator, plunging the reader into an abyss of despair and pain. The tragedy in Akihabara became a symbol of a troubling time, when society faced new challenges and problems. It reminded us of the importance of taking care of mental health, the need for social support, and the importance of fighting hatred and violence. That every human life is valuable, and we cannot remain indifferent to the suffering of others. This tragedy taught us all a harsh lesson. It vividly demonstrated how important it is to pay attention to those around us, to notice alarming signs in time, and to lend a helping hand to those in need. It reminds us of our shared responsibility for building a safe and just society where everyone feels protected. The tragedy that unfolded in Akihabara served as a bitter reminder that even in the most prosperous and peaceful country, terrible events can occur. She shows how easily a fragile balance, a thin thread of peace, can be torn apart by one person, consumed by hatred and despair. One person whose mind was clouded by darkness. We must remember the victims of Akihabara. We must hold in our hearts the names of those who perished on that terrible day and sympathize with those who survived, forever imprinted with the nightmare they experienced. We must remember our interconnectedness, that we are all bound together by invisible threads, and that it is our responsibility to create a world worthy of a better fate. The tragedy in Akihabara is not just a dry chronicle of mass murder. It is a story of human suffering, of irreparable loss, and despite everything, of unquenchable hope that continues to shine even in the darkest times. This story is about how important it is to notice those around us and how necessary it is to confront hatred and violence. It is forever etched in the memory of the Japanese people. Now, years after the tragic events of that day, as we turn to them again and again, it seems that this story will never end. She will continue to live on in people's hearts, a reminder of the fragility of human life and the importance of understanding and being ready to help one another. Perhaps most importantly, she reminds us that even in the darkest times, there is always room for hope. Hope for a brighter future, where we will remember the tragedies of the past and strive with all our might to prevent them from happening again. And we must ask ourselves, what are we doing to make this happen today?